Did you know that in 1943, near the Russian city of Kursk, a ghost army of over 10,000 soldiers appeared out of thin air? Of course you don't, because it never happened. But this is only one of many similar stories from World War II that have become so ingrained in popular consciousness that most people just assume they must be true. Throughout the war, there were all kinds of mysterious occurrences that no one could explain. But when you look into these stories, you find that there's almost always a rational explanation for what happened. Sometimes it's something mundane like mass hysteria or simple miscommunication. And sometimes it's something more sinister like Soviet disinformation. In this series, we're going to take a closer look at some of these spooky stories from World War II and separate the myth from the reality. Today we'll be looking at the Ghost Army of Kursk. On July 5, 1943, the German Wehrmacht launched a massive offensive against the Soviet Union. The goal of this attack was to destroy the massive bulge in the Eastern Front that had been created during the Battle of Kursk 6 months earlier. Wehrmacht's troops came within just a few miles of reuniting their forces around the city. This close call brought back memories of the battle, which had been the largest tank battle in history. At its peak, there were over 6,000 tanks involved in the battle, with the Germans eventually withdrawing after suffering heavy losses. But as the Soviets prepared to counterattack, something strange happened. Witnesses reported seeing thousands of soldiers who didn't belong to either side, complete with uniforms, weapons, and even vehicles. And some of these soldiers were on foot, while others drove in armored vehicles marked with a red cross. There were also dozens of trucks carrying what looked like wounded and dead soldiers. These mysterious troops were seen by both sides and even some civilians, not to mention there were multiple aerial witnesses as well. For the next 2 days, this ghost army grew, eventually numbering in the tens of thousands. Then on July 9th, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. So who were these mysterious soldiers? And why did they appear in the middle of the Eastern Front? Well, it depends on who you talk to. To the Soviets, this was obviously a German trick designed to distract them from their counterattack. To the Germans, it was clearly a Soviet ploy to make them think that reinforcements were on the way. The truth, however, was much more mundane. It was actually a case of mass hysteria, combined with a little bit of miscommunication. It started on July when the Soviets began their counteroffensive. This put German commanders in a difficult position because they needed to hold the line until reinforcements arrived. But they were spread too thin to reinforce every section of the front. This meant that the units holding the line near Kursk were severely undermanned. As the Soviets pushed forward, they quickly made contact with these depleted German units. And because the Germans were so outnumbered, they began to fall back. This caused panic to spread among the defenders, who were already exhausted from months of fighting. As the situation grew more chaotic, rumors began to spread that the Germans were being reinforced by elite paratroopers flown in from France. This was completely false, but the rumors persisted. Eventually, this mass hysteria reached such a fever pitch that soldiers began to see things that weren't really there. German soldiers reported seeing entire battalions of phantom troops manning defensive positions, and one captain even claimed to see armored vehicles filled with ghostly white-faced soldiers. Some even reported seeing ghostly commanders issuing orders to these spectral units. Meanwhile, on the Soviet side, similar rumors were circulating. Soldiers reported seeing entire formations of Soviet troops manning anti-tank guns and firing on the Germans. They also claimed to see medical units moving through no man's land, tending to the wounded and burying the dead. But in reality, these were just Soviet sappers attempting to repair damaged fortifications and clear away debris. Unfortunately, the rumors only grew, and soon entire divisions were claimed to be marching on Kursk to reinforce the beleaguered troops. Among the Soviets, there was even a rumor that a legendary general had come out of retirement to lead the defense of Kursk. This supposed general wore a long white beard and drove around in a staff car. Some claimed to have seen him directing artillery fire with a pair of binoculars. Others said they saw him riding a white horse and leading phantom cavalry charges. As it turned out, this legendary figure was an actual general, but he wasn't leading any troops. General Pavel Pobyedonosets was indeed present at Kursk, but he was there to oversee the defense of the city as part of the Supreme Command of the Western Front. He was known for wearing a long white mustache and driving around in a staff car, which likely led to the rumors that he had a white beard and rode a white horse. In addition to the phantom troops, there were also reports of a large force of foreign nationals who called themselves the International Brigade. According to legend, this force consisted of Italian, Romanian, and Hungarian soldiers who refused to fight for the Germans any longer. These men supposedly laid down their arms and instead joined the Soviets in their fight against fascism. However, this story has been debunked by historians who have pointed out that there were no Italians, Hungarians, or Romanians fighting for the Germans in this area at the time. Furthermore, there are no records indicating that any of these soldiers switched sides. What probably happened was that the soldiers who had been trapped in the pocket at Kursk for months simply began hallucinating as a result of exhaustion and malnutrition. In fact, this very thing happened to German soldiers as well. On July, German artillery observers reported seeing hundreds of British and American soldiers who were supposedly guarding ammunition depots and anti-aircraft guns. These sightings continued until July, at which point the Germans broke through the Soviet lines and ended the apparition. Of course, this wasn't the only time that phantom armies appeared during World War II. In September 1944, Allied troops in the Philippines reported seeing thousands of Japanese soldiers who had apparently risen from the dead to defend the island. This was later revealed to be a ruse by the Japanese, who were hoping to lure Allied troops into a trap. And in December 1944, German soldiers in the Ardennes forest reported seeing a massive phantom army consisting of Americans, British, Canadians, and even Australians. Like the Ghost Army of Kursk, this one turned out to be a case of mass hysteria caused by exhaustion and fear. Even stranger than these cases of phantom armies was the ghost train of Pensa. In the winter of 1942, residents of the Soviet city of Pensa reported seeing trains that were filled with ghosts. According to legend, these ghost trains rumbled through the city at night, carrying ghostly passengers who would get off and wander around before disappearing into thin air. Some claimed that these ghosts were the spirits of Soviet soldiers who died during the Battle of Stalingrad. Others said that they were the souls of German prisoners who were being transported to work camps. But the truth was much more mundane. There were no ghosts on these trains at all. Instead, they were full of real people who suffered from disfigurative dermatitis, a skin disease that makes the sufferer's face swell up so badly that they can't leave their homes without being identified first by their fingerprints. The people on the trains were being treated at a special hospital in Pensa, and their disfigured faces caused the locals to believe that they were ghosts. So why do these stories persist to this day? Well, it's partly because they're just plain interesting. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? But it's also because of Soviet disinformation. As we mentioned earlier, the appearance of the Ghost Army of Kursk coincided with the German offensive, causing Soviet commanders to believe that they were under attack on two fronts. This led to confusion and poor decision-making, which ultimately resulted in the death of many Soviet soldiers. It was actually quite common for the Soviets to spread disinformation like this, and it often had disastrous consequences for the Germans. One of the most famous examples of this was the Battle of Karansebes. In August 1944, the Germans were preparing to defend against the upcoming Soviet offensive when they received word that a large Soviet force was advancing through Romanian lines in southern Hungary. This forced the Germans to split their forces, and this proved to be a fatal mistake because the Soviets only penetrated Romanian lines as planned. The Germans were caught off guard, and the Soviets were able to advance deep into Hungary before the Germans could react. Another example of Soviet disinformation occurred during the Battle of Budapest. In January 1945, the Germans were again taken by surprise when the Soviets suddenly attacked through Budapest. This caused the Germans to abandon their positions outside the city and retreat into Budapest, where they were surrounded. In reality, the Soviets had never intended to attack through Budapest. They simply spread rumors that they would in order to lure the Germans into a trap. So the Ghost Army of Kursk was just a product of mass hysteria combined with a little bit of Soviet disinformation. But that doesn't mean that there aren't real ghosts at Kursk. In fact, there are over 2 million of them. if you want to learn more about the real ghost army of Kursk. Stay tuned because we'll be releasing our follow-up episode soon. Thanks for watching.